There is one story in town, and that is the conflict in Iran and how everybody is responding to it, including the UK and very much including the US. We've had this extraordinary post from Donald Trump overnight saying the United Kingdom, our once great ally, maybe the greatest of them all, is finally giving serious thought to sending 2 aircraft carriers to the Middle East. That's okay, Prime Minister Starmer. We don't need them any longer, but we will remember. We don't need people that join wars after we've already won.
That must have been news to the American soldiers who are currently fighting the war that they've already won it.
Indeed, Lewis. But I think also picking out that we will remember. I mean, this is basically Donald Trump saying the fact that you didn't let us have access to those UK bases initially. Of course, the UK did effectively U-turn about 24 hours later and say they could use them. And the fact that you have been, as some would say, slow in your response to this conflict. And the fact that Keir Starmer stood up in the House of Commons and made a few choice comments, including the fact that implying strongly he didn't think Donald Trump had a plan, implying strongly that he thought the initial strikes didn't have a legal basis, and saying that we don't believe that you have change from the skies. And I think that actually sort of humiliated Donald Trump, and this is how he's responding to that.
I mean, I suppose the thing is, the sort of background to all of this is that there have been lots of people within the Parliamentary Labour Party and the public, Labour voters, who've wanted Starmer to be more tougher on Trump. And the point is that although two things can be true at once, it is true, and you wouldn't know it from the way that a lot of the media have covered this, particularly the newspapers, for whom there has been a kind of really loud, sort of thunderous din of a drumbeat to war over the past week. Absolutely furious. A lot of these people who are most exercised about our sovereignty and telling us we should use our sovereignty all the time. Absolutely furious with Starmer for even adopting a sort of moderately independent foreign policy position out of the US. That is all true. Starmer is closer, way closer to where the public are than any of those people who basically don't want us to get involved, might not want us to damn the US completely in the way the Greens do, but don't want us to get involved. But it's also true to say it is Starmer who has invested a huge amount of political capital in that relationship with Trump over the last 18 months. And a lot of that may now well be spent.
Exactly. And it's been so interesting speaking to Labour MPs, Labour sources, government figures over the past few days who basically have been saying, effectively, isn't this brilliant? One Labour source saying to me, if he doesn't whack us with tariffs, it's really good, talking about the fact that everyone hates Trump in this country. Not quite true, but lots of Britons do, according to the polling. Everyone hates Trump in this country even more than they hate Kieran. I was speaking to one Scottish Labour MP who said that basically on the doorstep, people were saying, good for you guys, standing up to Donald Trump. And of course, that won't be a universal position. But I do think that becomes quite difficult when Keir Starmer and people around him have basically heralded the fact that over the past few months, he has had this great relationship with Donald Trump, as they would say, been very, very close to him, been this sort of
horrible phrase,
bridge.
Trump whisperer.
Trump whisperer. Yeah. And the fact that they basically thought that was a great strategy. And now that strategy is very much changed.
Well, Yvette Cooper, the Foreign Secretary, spoke to her earlier this morning. I put those questions about exactly what Trump has said overnight about the US-UK relationship. This is what she said.
Our security cooperation with the United States is long-standing, runs back many generations, and is also extremely deep. And I was first personally briefed on some of the detailed intelligence cooperation, which has strengthened since then over 25 years ago.
Our once great
that
ally.
Cooperation continues and will always do so. But I know there are some people in politics who think that we should just always agree with the US on everything. There are other people, frankly, who say we should never agree with the US and do anything in conjunction with the US.
So do you not accept that the
think that's
relationship
wrong.
is
Well, the
damaged?
important thing to do is to make sure that we act in the UK national interest.
Do you not accept that the relationship is damaged?
Well, there would be differences of view. And we did have a difference of view, for example, on Greenland as well. But then we continued to work together and are now working closely together on issues around Arctic security through NATO.
I tell you what I thought was interesting about that whole exchange. Two things. First of all, when you're doing these things, you never obviously quite know what the line is going to be. And I had sort of thought, and certainly this is what different ministers in previous weeks had done whenever there was a kind of a more minor sort of disagreement between US and UK. Sort of play it down. Sort of play it down and go, look, this was a very specific thing. Now we're helping the Americans as soon as they asked to help them defensively, etc., etc., etc. But Yvette Cooper wasn't doing that. She didn't play it down. She accepted it and basically sat in that space and just said, well, yeah, some people will think we should never disagree with the US. Some people think we should disagree all the time. We've got an independent foreign policy. We're not going to outsource it to him.
And that is because of those points we were talking about, right? That's because it's going down well with the country. It's going down well with Labour MPs.
You've done it now. You might as well get some political benefit from it.
Well, quite. And also, I think they feel comfortable in their position related to international law. And so I think for all three of those points, they're sort of slightly... enjoying, I think, is too far, but they feel very, very comfortable with their position and how it's going down with the public.
I mean, I do think that there has been a lot of kind of really jaundiced commentary about all this sort of stuff. You can sort of disagree about whether or not it's a good idea that we get involved, and that's perfectly legitimate. But this idea that's been doing the rounds that somehow Starmer has to take kind of like unique responsibility for ruining the quotes special relationship, that like sycophantic phrase. I mean, like that's just kind of divorce or forget everything that's happened over the last 18 months. I mean, over the last 18 months, just to take a few things, Trump slapped us with tariffs. He chose to do that. He's backed Putin over Zelensky multiple times. He's reneged on our UK tech deal. He was for Chagos before he was against Chagos, and then for it again, and then against it again, embarrassing Starmer. He insulted our Afghan troops. I mean, he slapped us with tariffs, completely unnecessary. You know, you could go on, and you could go on, and you could go on. There must be a bit of Starmer and Cooper and the rest of them, sort of, who just, I don't know, do you think maybe this is just a little bit of payback?
I think there has always been this question of at what point does Starmer snap back? At what point does he actually stand up to Donald Trump?
You have to at some point, right? Otherwise, you are just a supplicant.
I mean, I thought there were various points where I thought last year, maybe this will be the moment, maybe this will be the moment. And I sort of concluded that actually maybe there would never be the moment. And that was based on so many conversations that I had.
Well, Starmer himself was the one who did say, right, that we must never choose between the UK and the US and Europe, that would be folly. And in a sense, that is kind of what he's doing, or at the very least he's making it clear he's made a choice against America in this case.
Yeah, but I was speaking to Labour MPs who basically say you sort of need to treat Donald Trump like a toddler. When he blows up, you just have to say, you know, there, put them on the naughty step for a bit and then bring them back into the conversation and actually never chastise him, which I think is what Keir Starmer did when he was standing up in the House of Commons last week.
So I do think, I mean, look, I think some of the sort of criticism about Starmer changing his position and about kind of, you know, not backing the US come what may is sort of overblown, or at least it's kind of misguided. I mean, I think we are in an unusual position, right? It's quite unusual that the UK would split with the US over something quite significant. This is not historically unprecedented in Vietnam and other things. That there have been moments, but it's still unusual. I do think that, I mean, personally, I do think, and I know you've had experience of this week because of your trip with the Defence Secretary to Cyprus, I do think actually a more legitimate source of criticism you could say about the government is our preparedness. Because our understanding right now is that the government first had a request from the US on the 10th of February about these bases. So they must have known something was coming. And now it does feel pretty embarrassing that our main response to this, the HMS Dragon, is not en route to the Mediterranean. It's not in Cyprus. It's in Portsmouth, and it will be until Tuesday, and it won't get there, I think, until the week after next week, by which time the walk will be over. Who knows? But that feels to me where there are some serious questions for the government.
I think that is completely right. And that was something when I was in Cyprus with the Defence Secretary who went to RAF Akrotiri. I couldn't quite get my head around it. Because I was speaking
Sounds like a holiday resort, Akrotiri, doesn't it? Sounds like I'll go for 2 weeks in Akrotiri.
Yes.
All inclusive.
Well,
we don't want to be doing that.
But I couldn't get my head around it because there were top military sources that I was speaking to who were basically saying, look, we've been ready since January. We've known this was coming. We've been ready since January. Healey himself told me that they'd been preparing for weeks. But at the same time, and I quizzed Healey about this, why is it that HMS Dragon wasn't ready to go? Why weren't these sort of capabilities en route, or at least not necessarily en route? HMS Dragon could have literally just, you know, been loaded, ready to go at a moment's notice. And I think their response to that has been that circumstances change and that's not the most important piece of kit, basically, and the air defences are more important. That's certainly what Yvette Cooper was saying to you.
The most important defences that you need in this kind of situation are around air defences and around some of the fighter jets that we have in the region. We moved those to the region before any other country was doing so in terms of some of our other
French have got a ship on the way. Other European countries have got ships on the way. Our ship is still in Portsmouth?
We moved the jets, the fighter jets, to Cyprus. We moved fighter jets to Qatar. We moved helicopters to the region as well. Wildcat.
You were warned about this on the 10th of February. The Americans first requested or alerted you to the potential of needing to use those bases on the 10th of February. It is now the 8th of March, and HMS Dragon is still in Portsmouth. Are you really saying we are and were as prepared as we might have been?
Well, what I'm saying is we actually moved 400 personnel as well as the additional jets and air defences and radars
Cypriots don't think it's
to
good enough?
the region.
I mean, it is. The Cypriots are annoyed, right? I mean, they are really annoyed. I've been on the record about. I mean, there are people now in Cyprus calling for the base to be shut down.
And you know, the High Commissioner of Cyprus was on the record talking about how angry he was, and I think that's part of the reason that the Defence Secretary went to Cyprus, went to RAF Akrotiri, which of course was hit last Sunday very late at night by a drone. They don't know whether it was sent by Western Iraq, someone in Western Iraq, or by someone in Lebanon, but they don't think it was sent from Iran.
How was your 36 hours in Akrotiri?
Well, it was.
Swimming?
It was no swimming. No.
Yes.
It was a sort of leaving very, very late on Wednesday nights on an extremely small RAF plane with the Defence Secretary, a small number of his team, and a couple of other journalists, landing in Cyprus. I think it's sort of 4 a.m. or something. Getting to the hotel 4 a.m. local time.
I love
in
those cheap
Cyprus.
flights.
Yeah, I mean the flight was absolutely extraordinary. And then in the morning going straight to the RAF base, and the RAF base. So quiet because all the families had been evacuated after that drone strike, and it wasn't just that one drone strike. There were missiles as well a day later that were intercepted. I actually met the pilot who intercepted those missiles, and he sort of played it down. He said the whole thing was like training. There's no euphoric sense of success, but he did celebrate with one solitary Kia beer when he got back after
Kia.
Of
course. Oh, grow up, John.
KIA.
Right. Yeah. I don't drink anything else, says John Healey.
So no, that was the pilot. That was
the
the
pilot.
The pilot
I see.
Also
right.
very, very
no, John Healey
on
wouldn't drink
message.
that. Right. Okay. Fine. Good.
But it was on serious high alert. So we were there just before we arrived. John Healey was already on the base, and an air siren went off, which basically means that a ballistic missile has come from Iran, and they think it's heading in the direction of the base. They then quite quickly, in that case, realised it wasn't. But John Healey at that stage was on a Cobra meeting, and the alarm starts going off. Everyone's sort of properly rushing to the floor with their hard hats on, with their full kit. John Healey's just on this meeting, sort of mutes himself and carries on. And when we were there, so maybe a couple of hours later, the alarm went off again, and we were in a car at this stage, and the driver immediately was like, we need to go faster. Quickly the people, servicemen in the car, turned round, having put on their hard hats, and was like, we're going to shelter. As soon as we get there, you need to get out quickly, leave your belongings. And so we got in. There was a lot of shouting, getting us into the shelter, getting us into a room, and I found out later Ministry of Defence employees were sort of shoved under a table effectively, and that's what high alert the base is on, and that's what the service men and women are basically doing and readying themselves in case of attack, in case they need to deploy.
Do you think they drank Thatcher's cider when she was Prime Minister at Akrotiri? Can we find that out?
I'll find that out. I'll find that out and report back.
What was your sense of Healey when he was there?
Well, I was worried about him sleeping because I was extremely tired after I was extremely tired after my 8 hours of sleep over 2 nights, and I think he is basically doing that every night. But he I don't think was worried about that at all. He was very defensive of their position, was very careful about his language. I think he was pleased to be seeing kind of troops there. He was pleased to be having those diplomatic meetings, and was very much spinning that the Cypriots, he was having meetings with local ministers, that had gone well, that it was sort of all on track. But it's obviously pretty difficult. And I think the other thing with him is this is one crisis that is going on right now, and I think it's difficult when you're a defence secretary. But there's also Ukraine going on, and you need to keep
and they are linked.
Zoomed out. And being across that as well as the immediate crisis in front of your face.
Well, and they are linked, not least because one way in the short term in which this helps Putin is that international energy prices, oil prices, gas prices have gone up. Putin's war chest, his foreign currency reserves were drawing right down. This is going to boost them all over again. And also, if the Americans use up a ton of ammunition and a ton of munitions and everything else, military resources over this war, which they're clearly going to do. Not that they were giving loads to Ukraine, but it certainly potentially weakens the US in terms of other responses from Russia or China in the future.
And that point about distraction too. I mean, if everyone's attention is on Iran and Iran's response, then it, potentially does become a bit easier for Putin in the very short term. But I think one of the big questions out of RAF Akrotiri, and one of the big questions I wanted to ask John Healey, was what happens next? I mean, Al Khans, who's a defence minister, basically said on LBC this week that basically just nothing's off the table, or words to that effect. And so I asked John Healey, I mean, how far could the UK get dragged into this crisis?
We've made a big commitment to allies in the region. We've made a big commitment because we have around 9,000 military personnel throughout the Middle East, and we have, as of a couple of days ago, almost 300,000 Brits in different parts of the Middle East. Of course we're committed to this. We'd made the big commitment of defensive air defences and stepping up the defence weeks ahead of this conflict. We're adapting to the conflict as it changes, the threats and strikes that we see from Iran, and we're determined that we'll do everything we need to protect British lives and protect British bases, but also British allies like Cyprus here. And it's very important that I'm here to be able to say that and then meet some of the extraordinary British personnel that are here doing that job.
And of course, it will amaze viewers and listeners to know that someone who has backed the American effort in trying to get regime change in the Middle East is one Tony Blair. Who I think he's got form. Changer le disque, Tony. Guess what? He's backed the American efforts. And indeed, at a private event, it has been revealed that he criticised Starmer and the government for not backing Trump earlier.
Indeed, saying in those comments as well, this is not something that I haven't already told the government. And then a spokesperson for him telling the Mail on Sunday that he never intended for these comments to become public.
No, my comments haven't leaked, have they? Oh, no.
But
A room full of journalists.
He was saying at an event hosted by Jewish News, we should have backed America from the very beginning. He described the US as an indispensable ally to the
Famously
UK.
media-shy Tony Blair there.
Well, quite. And that the Prime Minister should better show up. But Lewis, he never wanted those comments to become public.
No, of course not. No, of course. I mean, the way in which, I suppose, and one thing you could definitely say is that I think, the shadow of the Labour Party, the shadow of the Iraq War, it is so long over the Labour Party. And I don't think I think it is genuinely harder for a Labour Prime Minister in the wake of Iraq, in the wake of Blair, to back anything like this. I mean, that is one of the unintended consequences. I mean, Blair can complain all he likes about it, but the fact of the matter is, such was the disaster of Iraq in the end. He doesn't accept that, but widely considered to be such a disaster in the end that it has made all future intervention, certainly Labour Party or Labour government intervention, all the more difficult.
And Labour MP after Labour MP after Labour MP, when they stood up at this statement of the House of Commons last Monday, was talking about the shadow of the Iraq War. And Keir Starmer was saying over and over again, I think Yvette Cooper said it to you today, that they had learnt the lessons from Iraq. And you can just see how sort of long that shadow
this
really
would be bigger
is.
than Iraq. I mean, if the Iranian government, this would arguably be bigger than Iraq. I mean, Iran is a bigger player than Iraq was even in the early 2000s. It's absolutely central to the entire kind of dynamics of the Middle East. We've got no idea how it'll go. And one of the other things that I think is quite interesting and is different to Iraq actually about this conflict is what Kemi Badenoch's been saying about it. Famously shy and retiring Kemi Badenoch has been on the offensive about it. Normally when you get these things, you do get like these, at least like a sort of week or so of the semblance of kind of national unity or whatever, or at least the leader of the opposition trying to be statesman or stateswoman like. I think it's fair to say Badenoch has not been doing that. That's not been her approach up to now.
I think that's a reasonable comment. I mean, it all feels a bit strange because normally when you have a massive foreign policy issue like this, you normally actually have most of the parties, political parties in the UK, sort of backing each other.
Well, she's basically called Starmer a coward. She said that he can't make any decisions about anything. And then I think perhaps most remarkably, for obviously a woman who famously said that she always chooses her words perfectly, so she never has to backtrack on anything, she appeared to suggest that RAF servicemen and women at the Cyprus airbase where you were at were just hanging around doing nothing. She's saying that that's a result. She was criticising the government, but that's basically, she did say that our jets were just hanging around, despite the fact they've actively been involved in active duty repelling Iranian drones and missiles.
And that's something that Healey's actually called for her to apologise for after those comments from Kemi Badenoch.
Well, Chris Philp as well. The other thing that the Conservative Party said, including Kemi Badenoch, is that the Labour Party is not the patriotic party of yesteryear, which obviously suggests that Kemi Badenoch thinks that that Keir Starmer and others are not patriotic. That's a point I put to Chris Philp, the Shadow Home secretary and almost resident co-host on the show.
Are you really saying that Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper and David Lammy and the rest of them aren't patriotic?
Well, I would agree with that, because they've failed
They're
to
not
take
patriotic.
They've failed to take basic action to defend things like our sovereign base in
Pretty
Cyprus.
low blow to say they're not patriotic. You might disagree with them, but are we really saying they're not patriots?
Well, they failed to take basic steps,
That's
obvious
different
common
from
sense
being
steps.
patriotic, isn't it?
Well,
you could be an incompetent patriot. We could argue we've probably had plenty of those over the years.
All right. Well, look, I'll concede this. They could either be unpatriotic or they could be incompetent, maybe even both.
But Kevin
they're
Badenoch is saying they're not patriotic, or the Labour Party is
They
not
are certainly one of the two.
They're saying the Labour Party is not patriotic. I mean, they could turn around to you and say, well, you let our armed forces sort of run down over the years, so you're not patriotic.
Well, I don't agree with that. We've got two aircraft. We're the only major European power to have two.
And we had no
aircraft
planes on them
carriers.
for years.
And they're fully equipped with F-35Bs, the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world.
But it does feel. I mean, again, this is the sort of weird thing about this thing. It is genuinely It is genuinely partisan, and there are two different sides on it. And again, I mean, and the other sort of interesting subplot. This didn't have anyone from Reform on the show today, but where is Nigel Farage right now? Busy in the United States, and he was talking to Trump over the course of the weekend. And when did Trump fire off that broadside about Starmer? At the weekend. It's not hard not to conclude that perhaps two and two have come together.
And that's the thing lots of people say about Donald Trump, right? That Donald Trump can often repeat who he's last had a conversation with. But on that unpatriotic point, you know who else calls someone unpatriotic? And that's John Healey at that RAF base in Akrotiri. But he said that the Conservatives and Reform would be unpatriotic. Kind of for that point, actually, Lewis, talking about the Chagos Islands, Diego Garcia, and basically him saying for an elected British politician from the House of Commons, from Reform or from the Conservatives, to be going over to America, calling on President Trump to disown the deal we'd agreed and work through to protect the Chagos Islands, it is unpatriotic, it undermines Britain, and it's not the sort of leadership that British people should expect from elected politicians.
Big picture here. I spent last week asking a load of British politicians, Americans and others, about what the aim of this war is and what the end game would be. Well, a week later, I'm asking the same questions. Because the truth is that despite the fact that a week has gone by, different reasons have been put forward. Different outcomes have been put forward. And to be honest, the world is no further along than it was a week ago in terms of understanding either outcome or either reason.
I think that's what's really difficult when you're having these conversations, is that you can speak to British politicians.
It feels weird. It feels sort of almost slightly otherworldly, like sort of slightly different reality. Because nearly every other conflict I can think of, you at least sort of knew what the genesis was and where it was going, whether it was about WMD in Iraq or was about Gaddafi in Benghazi and Libya or whatever.
You're at least told something.
At least told something. Now we're being told so many things about, sometimes it's about regime change, sometimes it's about the nuclear arsenal that, we were told had been obliterated 9 months ago. It just sort of changes and changes and changes. It is a bewildering war.
Yeah, and there was something a few days ago from Donald Trump where he was basically saying if he hadn't struck Iran, then they could have had nuclear weapons within a fortnight. I asked Military of Defence...
A fortnight?
A fortnight.
Can you rustle up a nuclear weapon in a fortnight?
Well, I asked Ministry of Defence sources about that, and they sort of were not sure. And that is what's really difficult, because I think that's what the government is basically saying when they're basically not clear whether or not there is a plan.
And of course, it also means that, when we had the spring statement this week, I mean, the truth is all this stuff is throwing, in terms of UK domestic policy, if this does go on for a long time, which it so easily could, I mean, actually the implications in terms of energy price rises, reporting in the papers today saying that we only have 2 days of liquid gas that is stored, wider sort of fiscal implications and the rest of it, and also just bandwidth again for the government to do anything else. Profound domestic implications if it continues. And refugees, maybe, who knows?
Indeed, that's something you brought up with Chris Thorpe. And actually, he didn't rule out the idea that the Conservatives might be okay with Iranian refugees coming here.
I think that was what we call on the hoof. Making policy on the hoof.
I think that's potentially fair. One positive for Keir Starmer, if I may, is that I think it would be very, very difficult for him to be challenged by anyone in the Labour Party if this conflict continues.
I think that is absolutely certain. Every cloud. Aggie, thanks so much.